Walking together, walking, journeying together, journey. Participation I see as Synodal Church, and in discernment I see as Synodal Church, all we need. Walking together, walking, journeying together, journey.
Participation I see as no church, and in discernment I see as no church, all we need.
Together let us see participation reign again, communion in the mission once again.
Come on, let's sing along and say
Participation and communion one in the mission and see as Synodal Church.
when we talk, it should be a dialogue. Come.
Good morning, Sheila. The floor is yours. Good morning.
Reporting on today's morning's works, we were about 343 members present in the Synod Hall, and Pope Francis was also present. Yesterday, the minor groups, or Circulo Minoris, took place after the presentation of the draft of the final document. This morning, all the free speeches or interventions were focused on the draft document. The text was generally appreciated for its balance, depth, and density. However, some suggestions and proposals were offered. There were 40 speeches on the various topics related to synodality addressed so far. These included the topic of young people, with one of the youngest members of the Synod making an appeal to Synod fathers and mothers in view of the post-Synod. This is what he said: "Please do not leave young people aside, but walk with us. We want to walk with you." Other speakers spoke of the role of women in the Church, reaffirming their fundamental importance, then the role of the laity, of the episcopal conferences, of priests, consecrated life, and of the small Christian communities. This morning, too, current issues came to the fore in the Synod Hall, with a call for the Church to reiterate a loud and clear no against war. We must continue to demand and implore an end to these conflicts, it was said. And also added to this call, it was mentioned that if we don't continue with this call, there will no longer be a human being alive to read this document. So that's it from my side. I pass the word to Rufini. Thank you.
Very briefly, I will talk about the next steps. This afternoon and tomorrow morning, we're going to develop the MODI. This is going to be done by the working groups concerning the final draft. At the end of the morning, Father Giacomo Costas explain in detail this phase of our works. The MODI, let me remind you, are concrete proposals for amendments, and they can concern the elimination or addition or parts or sentences within the paragraphs. There are collective modi in the working groups and individual ones. The collective ones are adopted in the individual working groups, and every member is invited to make his or her proposals. Every modus is voted separately, and it is required the absolute majority, 50% plus one of participants, member of the working groups. And only the members can vote. The goal is to get to collective modis that express the view of the group. They will have to be handed in by tomorrow morning, the end of the morning, and every member can send the General Secretariat of the Synod also an individual modus or individual modi. Of course, the collective ones from the working groups have a greater weight. I also wanted to add that the final draft of the document was written in Italian as the official language, but it has been translated into the greatest number of languages possible with non-official and working translations, and this in order to promote the discernment among members. Among the languages it was translated into, also Ukrainian and Chinese. This was very much appreciated by the two Chinese bishops who are at the Synod. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ruffini, for your explanation, which makes us understand also what these modi are and how they are introduced in the document. So as I was saying, today with us we have Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo, Franciscan. The Cardinal is known for his positions in favor of social justice, against corruption, for the protection of human rights, and for his commitment in promoting peace in a country often marked by conflicts and political instability. His Eminence Ambongo is an important voice within the Congolese Church, where he fought in favor of transparency, good governance, and the protection of the most vulnerable. He has also criticized the uncontrolled extraction of natural resources from the country, highlighting the negative impact of this on the local communities, particularly in the areas that are rich in minerals. Within the Episcopal Conference, in fact, the Conference of the Congo, he has chaired the Justice and Peace Commission for 8 years, and that for natural resources. So let us look at the past few days. We are reaching the end of the Synod, and we would like to ask you, are you happy with the works of the Synod? And are you happy about the direction that is being followed by the Synodal Assembly? Thank you. I come from a country that is today considered as a land of mission. In other words, our church has been, up until recently, a church of missionaries. And this church must adapt to the reality of the socio-cultural context. The calling to the Synod on Synodality was received by us in Africa and in the Congo as a kairos, seeing together, understanding together how to imagine a new way of being church in this socio-cultural context in Africa, precisely. And it is with this hope that I have come to the Synod. And we have been participating in the Synod for the past 3 years, so we have now reached the last part, and on Sunday we'll get to the end of it. And at this very time, I must say that I have a feeling of satisfaction. I am happy with the Synod, which had been convened to develop a new way of being church and not to solve specific issues which exist in the church. Well, this Synod has remained faithful to this idea. And I can say that today, where we stand now, the notion of synodality, this new way of being a church, is something that we have acquired and learned. And then there will be the particularities which will emerge after the Synod. The Synod, in fact, has set the foundations and base. Go back to our homes and to our different churches, and also at the imagine how to implement this spirit of synodality. So I'm happy, I can say, that the Synod has not wavered. In other words, synodality. So I think that when I go, well, we will try together with our brothers, African brothers and dynamic, how to be a Catholic church, but doing so differently. So I can say that my feeling is of satisfaction. Thank you, Your Eminence. So synodality, as you said, has been acquired, absorbed, and so we can say that everybody in their particular churches will implement this new way of being a church that was proposed by the Synod. I would like now to give the floor to the Archbishop of Bamenda, remaining in the African continent. He's also known for his strong pastoral commitment, his closeness to the faithful, at a time which is particularly difficult for Cameroon, marked by internal conflicts and social conflicts, particularly in the English-speaking region, of which Bamenda is one of the main cities. As an ecclesial leader, His Excellency Juania talked often about the need for peace and dialogue in Cameroon, particularly in the context of this crisis, which saw tensions between the central government and the English-speaking regions of the country. His Excellency has also promoted initiatives for social justice and the support of the poorest and the most vulnerable persons in his community. Since 30th April 2022, he's president of the Episcopal Conference of Cameroon. His Excellency is going to talk about the African contribution to the Synod, starting from the grassroots communities and the catechists. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My own feeling is a feeling of gratitude for this Synod on Synodality that has taken place within the past 3 years, beginning from the consultation phase. And it is a very beautiful exercise that has taken place in the Catholic Church within these years. And Synodality, I say to many people, is an eschatological sign for us that we come together from all parts of the world with different ideas. And what Isaiah says comes true. The lion with lamb at peace, the bear and the calf are together. This is what has happened in this synodality. And I think if we just continue this way, it will be wonderful. And my wish is that practically all of us who are members of, who have attended this synod, can go back not just as passive recipients of synodality, but as active ambassadors, because synodality is the way we should go, all of us, the way the church should go. And I believe that synodality is the way forward. Synodality for us in Africa, especially from the community where I come from, is a total rejection of individualism. And it's a call for community living, working together. And this is where it is very important for us, what we call the small Christian communities. The small Christian communities is a complete rejection of individualism, because these communities begin with families, with the small communities themselves, the mission stations, right up to the parish, right up to the diocese, right up to the national level, continental, and then we have the universal level. And I think it is very important for us because within these small Christian communities, everybody knows everybody. We are going through a moment of the boom of Catholicism in Africa. Our churches are full. But our greatest preoccupation with synodality is how to keep our churches full for the future. And the only way we can do this is through synodality. And synodality comes very alive in the small Christian communities because you don't live in anonymity as a Catholic. There is no anonymous Catholic. Everybody knows everybody within their small Christian communities. And this is a very, very big treasure for Africa. The second point I want to bring out is the role of catechists, because the catechists are very, very important and they play a very important role. And this is what is making our churches, for now, still alive. Because at every level, we have catechists. For the small Christian communities, for the mission stations, and for the parishes. And sometimes when we are hearing the problem of participation of women, it's a little bit strange for us in Africa. Because our African women actually run our churches for us. More than 50% of our catechists who lead the small Christian communities and the mission stations are women. And therefore, it's a very important aspect for our synodal church that we are together within these small Christian communities, and we are within these mission stations and parishes and want to move forward. And lastly, we are a synodal church, and it's the new way of being church. I would say without fear or favor that Africa is a special ground and a fertile ground for synodality. It helps us in peacekeeping because in these small Christian communities we resolve our matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, synodality has the present and the future, a collective journey that is growing and in which women play a fundamental role. Let us now pass from Africa to Europe, and we go to Germany with Excellency Franz Josef Overbeck. His Excellency studied theology and philosophy at the University of Munster at the Collegium Germanicum and Hungaricum here in Rome, where he was ordained 35 years ago. Monsignor Franz Josef is the president of Adveniat, the German Catholic organization dealing with assistance to the Church in Latin America. It's one of the greatest charitable works of the Church in Germany, and it focuses on projects of development, education, social assistance, pastoral assistance in Latin American countries. Your Excellency, in a world, in the Western world, but not limited to it, we are witnessing a period of post-secularism now. And in this context, we should therefore start all over again a process of enculturation at all levels. Is that the case? Yes. Thank you for your introduction. Dear brothers and sisters, in Germany, we are living a different culture at the moment after so many years as Catholics or Protestants. We now have a population which is almost has reached almost 84 million people. Half have no religion and have no idea who God is, and they have no questions or doubts about this reality or interest. On the other hand, the other half is either Catholic or Protestant, and there is also the presence of over 4 million Muslims who are working with us. What does this mean for the Catholic Church? In this context, it means that it has to be reinculturated into a postless, secularized reality, which implies also revising our organizations. So we have reached a certain framework in the sense that our parishes are made up of elderly people for the most part, and young people have specific interests, but the old structure is no longer applicable. The small communities, for instance, in Africa, are developing, growing, but they are not as visible by everybody. On the other hand, we have another secularization not just on the part of women, but also of men. I don't want to just talk about questions on women. It's rather, the idea is how to be a man or a woman of quality in such a difficult society. This is what we should be looking at. And this is what we focused on, not just during the previous session last year, but also during this one. And we have decided to evangelize again. And after all 2,000 years, we must look at this. We must provide a new answer concerning the role of women in the Church. So far, we have not found an answer to the lack of priests, unless we change, we will no longer have priests in our parishes, and this is going to happen relatively soon. And what does this mean also for our liturgy culture? And in this situation of post-secularism, we are a church that is experiencing a tension between the structures, which are the old ones, and a new spirituality. This is what we are experiencing, and so synodality is is something that we have been implementing for many years. For instance, all our structures in our parishes are synodal, and they have been so for over 50 years. So also, this is also the case in the Episcopal Conference. So after the great scandal of the abuses, we developed a synodal path, which also allows us to reflect on all our synodal structures that we have developed. So this is another element testifying to our synodal culture. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. And let us now give the floor to Reverend Clarence David Hassan, who was born in Kuala Lumpur. He was ordained there in 1997, and there he is carrying out his ministry. For 8 years, he was Executive Secretary of the Office for Theological Matters of the FABC, the Federation of Episcopal Conferences of Asia, Director of the Theological Research Center of the Archdiocese, and he participates in the Synod as a witness of the synodal process. So we were saying Christians are a minority in Asia, and so we now move to another continent. They live their faith among the Hindu, the Buddhists, the Islam. And you were saying earlier that in how important dialogue is in this context, both ad intra and ad extra. Thank you. Good morning to everybody. I will be speaking in English.
I come from Asia, and I've always asked, what does Asia bring to this synodal process, this synodal journey? Christians are a minority, and so that is the lens through which many Asians would look through. What does this mean? And what is the uniqueness of the churches in Asia in this context of moving or walking together? Except for the Philippines and Timor-Leste, which are majority, they are Christians, all other parts of Asia, we are a minority, which simply means that being a minority, we live in the midst of peoples of other religions, as Christian has pointed out already. And in this process of synodality, while living with others as a minority, we need to look at both perspectives. How are we synodal ad intra within the church? How do we live synodality ad extra with others? While many people will say that the faith is very vibrant, very alive in Asia, but that is not to say that the other problems of secularization and other issues are not present in Asia, perhaps in different degrees. One of the things that we find in Asia is that the public space for the expression of faith seems to be shrinking in many different parts. And this is possibly, and this is partly because of political extremism and also religious extremism. So in this context, there is a need to dialogue. There is a need to seek harmony. Some people say dialogue is an option, but if I may be brave enough to say, in Asia, dialogue is not an option, but dialogue and harmony is a matter of survival in order to exist, in order to live with others. So dialogue is not a novelty. Dialogue is a necessity. It is part of the daily lived experience. And because we come from a very pluralistic culture with different religions, with different cultures, with different traditions, it is necessary to seek harmony. It is necessary to live with each other. And so you see, synodality is at the very base, because we also realize that interfaith and intercultural marriages are on the rise, and children born in these families learn how to listen to one another, learn how to respect one another, learn how to speak with one another in a very respectful way. And so I think synodality is at the very base already. I will not get into the basic communities, basic ecclesial communities have already been spoken about, but at the very core, in the family itself, is an experience of synodality. So this journey of synodality is not something that is new to many parts of Asia. It has already existed, and it continues to bring and also continues to animate the church. The second point is also not just from the lived experience, but coming from a place where Christians are a minority, it also forces us to look at theology. How do we do theology in terms of living with others? What does it mean? What does evangelization mean for places where you're not allowed to evangelize publicly? What does it mean to express your faith in your workplaces where you are just one or just a few? How do you live out your gospel values? These are things that we often want to talk about and to see how the church can be the salt and the light in many parts of the world. And I just conclude that, the phenomenon of migration has also brought a lot of Asians out of their own homes to many parts of the world. And I would say that they are the new missionaries, that as they leave, they not only seek economic gains, but they bring their faith along with them. And I know in many parts of the world, the churches are animated by many Asians and with others to keep the faith alive. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. This is so true. Thank you for highlighting the contribution of Asian missionaries. So let us now pass the floor to our friends journalists, starting from the back of the hall of the room.
Parramatta Diocese. My question is to Bishop Overbeck. First of all, I'd like to thank him on behalf of the global church, many people who have experienced the great generosity and goodness of the German church in the developing world, so-called developing world. Thank you, Bishop. Also, I'd like to apologise to you for some of the unfair criticisms that have been launched against the German synodal way, in my view a subterfuge to undermine Pope Francis's synodality project. But more importantly, you leave here, and we all leave here, to live out synodality now in the next phase. Could you share with us your hopes about how synodality can be lived out over the next few years? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Thank you also for this consolation. I will bring it also to Germany. Thank you so lot. Well, I'm thinking that it's very important actually now to look what may be the efforts of which we have done here in Rome. Firstly, I'm thinking it is a kind of stick to the point. What is the role of the female? What is the role of the woman in church? And that is for me very important, looking to the absence of priests, looking also to the changement of who is doing the pastoral work. And that means for me, for example, in my diocese, to strengthen the women in all the pastoral work they can do. And also by baptizing and all the other kinds of being together with the others, also for doing preaches. It's for me the first step we have to elaborate. Secondly, we have to be very patient going with the internal church. That's also very important to stress here in our appointment this afternoon, because otherwise there would have been the same questions to us when we just started 6 years ago our synodal path. And thirdly, I'm very convenient that the elaboration of a new culture signifies for us to get into contact with our very old traditions of music and arts, for looking forward what would mean that for our liturgical way of staying together, by seeing and remembering that the youth is just other form of getting contact what we are doing when we are celebrating liturgy. So these 3 points I think we will strengthen for the next times, because being together with the whole church.
Grazie mille.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Castagnaro, who for some days has been missing. So he's on this side of the room. My question is for Monsignor Ambongo. If I understood correctly, you said that this synod is having success, it's been successful because it is helping the church and the people at the synod to share a new way of being a church, a new way, if I've understood correctly, that can be summed up as unity in diversity. So my question is, which I've raised already, how would you live today if today Rome would authorize a local church, let's say the Canadian church, to ordain women deacons without this becoming a general practice? Would you see this as a break in communion or a risk for communion or the expression of a legitimate diversity within the church? Thank you for your question. Well, diaconate has existed at the beginning of the church, in the early church, so it's not a new thing entirely in the church. And the African churches and I personally, we are not opposed to the possibility of studying how it was in the early church and consider this opening and have women who are deacons, ordained deacons. I think that we must focus and study on this more specifically. What do we mean with diaconate? At the beginning of the church, it was a service to the community. It had nothing to do with priesthood. It wasn't the first step in the road towards priesthood. So diaconate as a service was also open to women. Over time, we know that there was an evolution, and today diaconate is considered as a first step in the process towards priesthood. So there is diaconate, priesthood, and episcopate. So since diaconate remains a reality linked to priesthood, there is another theological matter that arises. So we trust in the commission that was set up by the Pope and by the Church, and that is studying at depth all these matters to clarify them. And if the Pope himself thinks that we must study this topic, and if he were to choose or decide for this option, we would be very happy. He's the Holy Father and we follow him. So there are no difficulties for us. But the matter that has to be studied, diaconate as a service or diaconate as a first step in priesthood. Thank you. Danubia from Brazil, Portugal. And my question is for Mrs. Pires and for whomever would like to answer. Concerning the draft document, final document, are you happy with the results achieved with this document? And what does this document tell us? We know that it's just a draft at the moment, but what does it point at? What does it contain? Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes, it's still a draft. And the reaction was positive because the language used in the document is simple and it helps all the baptized and the members of the church in this journey. So as we said yesterday, it was a day of retreat, to reflect and to think, read, and to examine the content of the document. So yesterday, this is what we did, and this morning, many of us shared our impressions, our ideas, our suggestions, and what can be strengthened, what can be amended. So I think that in general terms, many people are happy with the document. Thank you. Thank you. We can now give the floor to Liz. So we're going to give the microphone to both sides of the audience.
My name is Elise Allen with the Crux news site. I'll ask my question in English to Bishop Overbeck and also to Cardinal Mbongo. As you mentioned at the beginning, part of the Synod process has been, trying to envision a new way of being church, also by listening to the voices of many people who have felt excluded or marginalized in the past. And this has included, at various points along the way, members of the LGBTQ community. Your respective bishops' conferences have had very different positions on this issue and very different receptions, for example, of Fiducia Supplicans last year. I'm wondering if each of you can share a bit about how the Synod process and having the dialogue with other members and participants has perhaps changed or shifted your own views, opened your own perspectives a bit on this issue. Thank you.
Well, so I will be the first. Well, you know that we are living just in a very different culture regarding to the last 50, 60 years, just according to the question of LGBTQ and the respect on the different kinds of living sex and gender and also partnership. This is also a question in the church for more than 20, 30 years, wouldn't have never been before. And so it was just a learning process of so-called synodality, but we didn't mention this concept in the years before. Actually now there were also some very intensive clarifications also on the level of pastoral work within our dioceses with different results, you know that. I think, like Pope Francis always is talking about, you have to have many respect of the destiny and also of the personalities of whom is in front of you. And so I ask also to everybody, neither in my responsibility of being Bishop of Essen or in my responsibility of Bishop of the military in Germany, where the questions always are on the top of the speeches and questions of today. So this may be a good step in going on with all this reflection regarding to the past, being honest and being very sensitive to the destiny of people, and also being aware of that the first who is working is God, with the aim of every people and everybody, and not the churches first.
Perfect.
Excellent. Heinz.
Michael Haynes from LifeSite News to Eminence Cardinal Mbongo. Eminence, in L'Osservatore Romano recently, Father Radcliffe made a commentary on the Synod, and he made reference to the response to Fiducia Supplicans, which came from Africa. He made an interesting comment. He mentioned American and Russian money and money from the Gulf countries, and he posited that as being behind the African response to Fiducia Supplicans. I wonder, could you speak to that, because you were quite involved in collecting the various responses from the bishops' conferences. Thank you very much.
Sì, allora.
This is not the theme of the briefing today, because we are talking about the Synod. But if he wishes, His Eminence can, of course, answer this question, if he so wishes. I think it's important to clarify things. Otherwise, people may think we are hiding something. We have also read this article in which we are accused of having taken money from Russia, from the Gulf countries, and from the United States through the Pentecostal churches. So we read that article ourselves. But we are at the Synod, and we follow the teachings of Father Radcliffe. and I do not recognize at all what Father Radcliffe said in the article you are mentioning. And I can tell you that today Father Radcliffe came to me before we began, because he read the article only yesterday, and he is shocked that such things may have been written, attributing these things to him. And I think that it is your duty as journalists to clarify things. Father Radcliffe has never said these things, and this does not correspond at all to his personality. If he had said so, or these things somewhere else, but he was there with us, and nobody felt accused. And I can assure you that this is something that is totally untrue. This has got nothing to do with what Father Radcliffe has said. I don't know who wrote this article, but I think that the intention of this article was to create sort of an incident, but fortunately this has not happened. Thank you. Diane Montagna.
Montagna, two questions. The first for the Bishop of Cameroon, and for Cardinal Ambongo, if he wishes to respond. The more controversial topics. First, you both spoke very well of your experience here at the Synod and of synodality. The more controversial topics have been given over to the small groups, hand-select small groups. In light of the issuance of fiducia supplicans shortly before Christmas, that is after the Synod on Synodality, and quite apart from the Synod on Synodality, why should the Catholic faithful who seek to remain faithful to the Church's teaching have any trust that these more controversial topics will not be handled in the same way? And my second question, just for Bishop Overbeck, you mentioned women preaching, but perhaps you could clarify what you mean by that, because preaching is tied to holy orders. The preaching of the Word of God was entrusted to Christ's priest. So in what scenario could you imagine a woman preaching, given that this has never been part of the Church's tradition? Thank you.
Following the way the Synod has worked within the past 3 years, it is very important for us to realize that the process must continue. We have started in a way that we can no longer stop. And these controversial topics that have been given to the small groups, it's not like an exclusive situation where they hide themselves in a small room and come out with results and announce. It is also done in a synodal way. And that is why last week we had a meeting with the various working groups. Everybody could go to the working groups, hear them, see what they have done, and bring up their own suggestions. And I think we may have differences in reasoning, but what we all look forward to is that at the end of this synod, and in continuation to live our Catholic faith, the Church will still be one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Yours sincerely. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellenza. Possiamo andare a Flynn dopo. Pavel, per favore.
News paper. I'd ask also a question to His Excellency Overbeck. So in which scenario do you think that women can preach? Yes, because this is linked to ordination.
Voilà, appena dalla qualità e dalla comprensione.
This depends on what you mean by preaching and its quality. In my diocese, we've got very few priests And there are some services in which the only guidance is provided by women, and they also preach. For instance, when there are services with children, well, they are managed by women. And we also have another difficulty, is that sometimes there are priests who cannot speak German well, so because they come from other countries and cultures, so people wouldn't understand them. So in that case, women preach because there is no other way. I mean, they don't speak the language. So it depends on the situation, really. Great. Thank you. Let us now pass on to the next question.
Chmielewski, Polonia Christiana from Poland. I have a question to Bishop Overbeck. There is an idea discussed in Europe about creating a European Synodal Assembly. It is discussed in Germany, in Austria, in Poland too. In your opinion, what should it be and what authority should have this kind of European Synodal Assembly? Thank you.
Well, you know that it's just in starting going to do that, and that means not to compare it with the other continental synods because of our history. You know that this kind of Catholic lifestyle and being Catholic came and comes from our big continent with also different histories, also with the people to each other. For example, regarding to Germany and all the other countries around Germany, it's not always very easy. And then also by looking on the languages we are speaking and talking, looking onto the cultures we are living, you know that there is a large extent from north to south and from west to east, and it's not so easy to combine all these different styles of being Catholic to get in a one synod, European synod together. Maybe once we can do that, but well, I have many experience with America Latina, you know, because I'm responsible for Adveniat, but also as military bishop, I'm always looking on to all the other styles of staying together. That means be very precious of all these different styles of being Catholic. So I would be a bit not skeptical, but I'm not so serious what's going on with this kind of attentive. We did it in Prague, in preparing our staying here in Rome, and we did it also in Linz. So it has been two different kinds of staying together and sharing minds and also discussing, and we have to be very aware of that. So it's really a special, very special staying together and not comparable with all the other continents, what we are doing here in Europe.
Grazie, Monsignor Overbeck. Father Rees.
Thank you. Father Rees.
Bishop from Cameroon, could you give us a little more detail about what women catechists do in your country, especially in relation to the sacraments? For example, would they baptize? Would they preside at scripture services and preach and preside at communion services? Could they witness marriages? What kinds of things can the catechists do that are connected to the sacraments?
The catechists, because first of all, we have mission stations, and you will have many mission stations that form the parish. And it is not possible for the priest to be there every Sunday. Absolutely impossible. Sometimes he has to go for many hours to get to one of his mission stations. There, the catechist is in charge of that community, and to prepare the children for the sacraments, prepare adults for the sacraments, preside over Sunday services, bury the dead. But for sacraments, they'll prepare the people and call the priest to come. But for taking care of the community for Sunday services, everything that happens on that Sunday is done by the catechist. And if anybody dies within that community, it's the catechist that does the service for the burial and for everything. But as for the sacraments, except in danger of death, where they'll give baptism, and whatever the law prescribes, they'll wait for the priest to come whenever he comes, and he does that. But for the rest, the catechist is in charge of that community of Christians.
Grazie.
Thank you. At the back.
Tanner from Black Catholic Messenger. I'd like to ask a question to Cardinal Lumbongo related to synodality and also resource extraction in the Congo. Pope Francis recently announced his intentions to open a cause of canonization for King Baudouin from Belgium. And the king had at one point praised his ancestor Leopold II's rubber terror in the Congo. And he was also believed to be involved in the assassination of the DRC's first prime minister, Patrice Lumumba. So I'm curious about your thoughts on the Pope's decision and also whether he may have discussed it with the Congolese bishops before the announcement. Thank you.
C'est une très bonne question. Mais je crois que c'est...
It's an excellent question. I think that the Church of Belgium that has prepared for the dossier Baldovino is the king of the time of the independence. He came, he made a speech, so it's said that he gave independence to the Congo. But we know that something happened. The Prime Minister, Lumumba, died. So the Pope has expressed this desire for the Church of Belgium. But this is also being studied, this cause for beatification and eventually canonization. But we remain open. We remain open, saying that if the dossier works, then he was a politician who was a religious and he was very courageous in Belgium. But we don't know all the things that happened in his life. So if the dossier, the file prepared works and they want to present him for canonization, we agree, but then it's true that there is also this sort of stain. So we follow, like all the others do, to see what happens. Luis Modino. And then Flynn. Luis Modino, my question is for Overbeck. Sorry, we're not getting the voice. Okay. So Adveniat is considered to be a bridge between Latin America and Europe, and this was also important in order to bridge to build a bridge of synodality with Latin America. Well, we want to make sure that synodality is also implemented in Latin America, even though things are quite different there, and things are different also because of the number of priests and the extension of the countries in Latin America, which is very different from the situation in Europe. So since 1958 to 61, we sent considerable funding to Latin America in order to help them, always with a view to promoting synodality. I remember also some meetings with Cardinal Bergoglio when he was in Latin America, and I remember that he did in Latin America always along these lines of synodality. Let us now give the floor to Flynn.
My question is for Cardinal Mbongo. Eminence, I just want to make sure that I understood correctly what you said earlier. At least as I heard it in the translation, I understood you to say that we, and I presume here you're speaking about perhaps the bishops of your country or the bishops of SECOM, we're not opposed to having women who are deacons, and then there was a qualifier to say ordained deacons. Am I to understand that you're saying you have no sort of theological objection to the notion of women receiving the sacrament of holy orders, or did you mean something different?
Moi, je dis, au début de l'Église, il y a eu des diaconats dans l'Église. Et ces diaconats étaient liés au service. Le diaconat, c'était le service des tables. Dès lors que le diaconat...
At the beginning of the church, in the early church, diaconate was a service. But when diaconate became a service to the altar and the first step in priesthood, towards priesthood, then there is a theological issue that arises. The commission that was established by the Pope has this purpose precisely to have all these things better understood, to study them in order to better understand them. So when this commission has finished its studies, we will make a decision and we will abide by it. This is what I said. Thank you for clarifying. Your Eminence, Mbongo, I wish to thank all our guests, the Reverend Bishop Overbeck, Mrs. Sheila, His Excellency, the Bishop of Cameroon, Cardinal Mbongo, Reverend Clarence. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to the journalists who were with us, and we will be back tomorrow. I think for the last press conference before the last press conference at the end of the Synod. Thank you. Thank you and enjoy your afternoon.